Okay. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Nick Rivers. I consider myself an interdisciplinary artist. Of the many experiences which form my youth and who I am today, competitive sports, specifically hockey, have been most essential to me. Growing up because of hockey, I traveled a lot. Competing at a high skill level taught me determination, perseverance, and diversity. Really, I grew up on skates, and looking back, I realized I had a mother who pushed me hard to succeed, and these experiences were immensely influential in how I developed as a young man. And oddly, she's here today from Montana, so she gets to see some old pictures. So today, hockey really holds metaphors for how I think about my relationship to art, what I think art is. Anatoly Tarasov, widely known as the father of Russian hockey, once said that one who plays the game must have the wisdom of a chess player, the accuracy of a sniper, and the rhythm of a musician. He saw the game of hockey as an art, and his love was for the strategies of the game. I actually never thought that I would be an artist. Really, I thought I would be a professional hockey player like this guy you're watching, Wayne Gretzky. I loved hockey, the dance, the physicality of the game, the intensity, the struggle, and the tenuousness of each second on the ice. It's a game in which, by brief moments, the team coalesces for the pinnacle act, the goal. Hockey is a physical, competitive, graceful, and poetic sport that gathers the body, mind, and spirit. I love hockey much like I love creating because both of them have helped me to see who I truly am. So when I entered graduate school, I first thought about the body and the object. In early studio explorations, I began assembling things and emphasizing their interconnectedness. It seemed theorists more than artists were my first great influencers, and theorists opened a way to think deeper about my being, our beings, and our experiences as humans here on Earth. But ultimately, I do think that I've always been a doer first before a thinker. In this piece, Body and Object, Grass and Leg, I reflected on perception as it relates to a thing, when it hangs in the balance with time, linguistics, semiotics. I took short video clips of grasses and a set of legs and constructed a sculpture which mirrored these objects and blended the two together. I faced each of these elements towards each other and set up a dialogue between the objects. The philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari wrote about an interconnectedness, an entanglement, and complexity of organisms and objects and ideas when they outlined their ideas on the rhizome. And I've been captivated by this notion that relationships in ideas and things can be non-hierarchical, and yet they can still construct narrative, form, and meaning. This piece of mine seemed to reflect some of those ideas. And as I thought about interactions and relations, I began to think about the mark, the force behind the mark.
Yes.
Okay, this is an example of object-oriented ontology. So through studio research, inquiries, and explorations, I came upon glass, specifically automotive safety glass. Before this, my work had been more static than flux, and I was looking to bring real physical presence and relationship into my practice. And so began a dialogue with the evidence of the mark. The foundation of my art is based in the idea that all things are in relation to one another. It's not a highly complex idea, it's pretty simple. My work with glass uncovered the potential for the art to be sculptural, performative, and experiential. And I found that adding glass into my practice allowed for a deeper conversation about objects that were undergoing a change. Through interconnectedness, I can see how objects act upon one another, they rest or hang or collide with one another. Objects can tell a story, and of course not just glass does this. Things hold marks, all things, and evidence and serve as record of relations of things which have occurred, of that which is occurring, and that which is yet to occur. As I see things and perceive things, as we see this world and construct meaning, we as the audience breathe life into this world. The things we do, the actions we take, produce change. This piece, Crush on You, was an example of an object undergoing transformation. Through physical force, the box constructed of automobile windshields and wood was crushed with chains, winches, and hand tools. Crush on You exhibits catharsis, violence, and destruction, but it also brings about change. I imagine this box as an example of the body as a vessel that can both contain but can also be broken. Maurice Merleau-Ponty said, "Nothing determines me from outside. Not because nothing acts upon me, but on the contrary, because I am from the start outside myself and open to the world." Descartesian thought might suggest that to think is therefore to be, or in other words, as we know, I think, therefore I am. But phenomenology, as suggested by Heidegger and onto thinkers like Merleau-Ponty, would suggest that it's because I am that I think. So for me, art is not a thing which exists static, it's a thing which is occurring. It's the being of the work and literally being in the work which I'm interested in. Beside myself but untouchable employs the use of a projector, a wall, and the art object, and allows the participant to pass through the field of the work between the wall and the projected glass. And in this way, I was addressing a desire to insert both myself and the viewer into the art experience. So when I returned to MCAT in the fall of 2015, I was thinking about energy, force, kinesis, and potentiality. As a landscape designer, I'd spent time in the summer watching boulders get moved by machines, while I considered erosion control, retaining walls, and cubic tons of earth. I thought about rocks, materiality, time, and power. And in my studio, I began to incorporate more natural materials and to deal with dislocation of these objects in order to create a tension between the industrial world and the natural world, as well as a tension between the potential of occurrence to that which has occurred. These two examples began a series of studio explorations which led to larger experiments in potentiality such as this one. This is a piece about hanging in tenuous balance at the precipice of something about to occur. By capturing actions of the piece on video, I disassociated elements of time, relation, and narrative. I like to think that the piece is activated, it's in potential, and yet at times it can contain a static pose. At times this piece is just a sculpture. In this video, a group of objects are placed in relation to one another. They're set in working motion to convey how all things are connected and related. Following after philosophers of the last 100 years, I'm meditating on a pretty simple theme, that cultural constructs of power and hierarchy are arbitrary in comparison to the physical world. So I love making, I love doing and being. I tend to think I relate with the abstract expressionists, the body artists, and conceptual artists who are more concerned with the relationships to the work than the actual work itself. Some of the conceptual artists and body artists which have influenced me are Chris Burden, Matthew Barney, and Chris Larson, all for their capability of drawing attention to the artist's experience and the work of art as an experience of the senses and the body. A sampling of the sculptors who have influenced my practice are people like Richard Serra, Tatiana Trauva, and Antony Gormley, all because of their capacity to make evident the complexity of forms in relation to one another and to the world. Gravity, the body, interobjectivity, and subjectivity are themes in this work. Trauva describes her work well in calling it ways of world making and ways of being in the world. And I too like to think that what I am doing is a meditation on my own existence and how it's connected with others. which really leads me to my thesis proposal. As I begin to distill my practice towards a thesis body of work, I continue to try to find ways in which my art practice can be sculptural, performative, experimental, and experiential. But interestingly, it's not a conceptual artist who's inspired me the most, but rather an illusionist, magician, and endurance artist, David Blaine. So in 1999, Blaine was buried 6 feet down under a glass tank filled with water for a week, being fed just 4 tablespoons of water a day. In 2000, he spent 61 hours, 40 minutes, and 15 seconds encased in a 6-ton block of ice in New York's Times Square. In 2003, Blaine began a 44-day fast sealed inside a transparent plexiglass case, suspended 30 feet in the air on the bank of the River Thames in London. He went without any food or nutrients for the duration of the stunt, surviving on just 4.5 liters of water per day. And amidst all this, through all this, Blaine has definitely undergone scrutiny. How did he do these things? Was it a stunt? But really, even more importantly, why did he do it? And even though I was fascinated by Blaine, I too struggle with the reasons behind his work. But as I've explored him more, I realized that transcendence, transformation, and a seeking towards the divine is embedded in Blaine's practice. So finally, in 2008, Blaine attempted to break the Guinness World Record for breath holding, and he succeeded in holding his breath for 17 minutes, 4 seconds, setting a new world record. Despite the cheesy Hollywood hype of this stunt, in David Blaine's TED Talk, I was moved by how he described his training and this performance. When interviewed and asked what he would be thinking about when he's holding his breath, he said to Oprah, "What I think about is I try to remove myself from myself. I try to get rid of everything. I imagine getting sucked into the abyss of the ocean. I don't have any thoughts. I empty everything out and become perfectly still, and by doing so, I begin to get the heart rate down, and when the heart rate slows down, everything slows down, and so time changes during that moment. It begins to feel like just one moment." When asked if doing these things was like moving to a new level of consciousness, David replied, "Absolutely." So much like David Blaine, I'm interested in pushing the limits of my experience. The thesis project I've begun will be to create a sculptural object that contains performance, encompasses ideas around the body as a vessel, and will be an experience meant to address my physical being, perception, and phenomenology. In order to do this, I'll be inserting myself into the work, pushing the limits of my own physical, emotional, and spiritual body, making myself a part of the medium, subjecting my being to the forces internal and external to the work. Endurance, time, the poetic meditation on the present moment. Although I've begun to formulate what this actually looks like, I'm not ready to share more of the complex details. So as individuals, our lives are woven together and constructed by one another. Recently, Facebook reported that users on their social media platform are connected to all others by only 3.3 degrees of separation. Life can seem a multitude of games by which just being in the world allows us to be the players. Games require rules in order to play, but games are not always about winning. Often they are about coordinated drive, determination, working hard, practicing. The game I played as a child, hockey, continues to influence me today as a young man. It's why, as much as I desire to know things by what I think, I also come to know things by how I feel and experience them in the moment. Pushing ourselves is a part of what it means to be human. Breaking through limitations reminds us that rules are meant to be broken, that change is inevitable, and that all things rely on one another. Thank you very much for your time.
So in relation to your thesis project and kind of looking at the idea of pushing those mental and physical and spiritual kind of levels of endurance. How reliant is that practice on an audience or spectators, or does that factor into what it is you seek as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially a lot of the theory that I'm looking at really talks about reception and perception, and when you start to get into thinking about those things, absolutely there has to be an other which shows up. So, the piece that I'm looking at doing for my thesis definitely involves a performative act. I think that the most important part of that is documenting it. And there's a divide that occurs between me sort of pushing my own limits of what it is that I'm trying to do within the work, and then whatever sort of reception kind of might occur after that. And I think that those are things that I'm still trying to flesh out as far as how much importance it is to be showing this as a spectacle. So.
Thank you.
So you talked about your interest in themes of change, themes of sort of potential for change, and objects and their like relatedness. I also see sort of a through line of themes of violence and risk and sort of danger. I wonder if you see that too, and if you think that that's, how do you think that relates? Do you think, is that a theme in your work?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it is. I think that brokenness is a theme that kind of comes up. I think a lot of that has to do with recognizing that through discomfort comes sort of a heightened awareness that when we move ourselves outside of our comfort zones and we actually push ourselves, that it's in those moments that we actually transcend on some, whatever sort of level you want to talk about that. So I think for me, in my life experience, I've definitely looked at how continuing to sort of challenge my own notion of like, what is the self? There are darker, if you want to call them darker themes which occur, which is really looking at distorted senses of perception and self that are not only occurring inside of myself, but that are occurring externally as a part of other people and how they perceive things as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for your talk, Nick. The question that comes to mind is when you turn to David Blaine and the metaphor that comes out of that work. Blaine, in holding his breath, he's reducing his heart rate. He's isolating himself. He's becoming static. He's controlling the environment, and really he's creating an anesthetic situation. Whereas as an artist, I would think that it's the aesthetic experience that you want to generate. And I'm wondering if, rather than David Blaine, of I think it's called freediving, that practice where somebody holds their breath and they just trace a rope as deep as they can possibly go. There's a dynamism there. There's a spatiality there that's involved with it. There's a kineticism. So I guess it's not really a question as much as it's a comment, but maybe to ask you to see if you could comment on the disparity between the two and how you might see it working for you.
Sure. So David Blaine actually, he studied freedivers. as a part of his practice for what he was doing. So that's called static apnea, and he did a basically breath assisted. So he super saturated his lungs with oxygen prior to what he was doing, which is the same thing that free divers do. Yeah, I think what I've been trying in my practice, one of the critiques that I've had is that I really move in a lot of different directions at the same time, or sort of following one step, I sort of overcompensate and move into a totally different realm. So one of the things that I've really tried to be looking at as I kind of move into thesis work is really distilling down like what is at the core of this work. And so for me, there's notions around the body as a spiritual vessel, as a physical object, and there's themes around sort of being encased within the art object and being a part of it, and then looking at some form of endurance. So I would consider David Blaine an endurance artist, and you know, the performative aspects each can be a little bit different in how meditative they are. I definitely think that holding your breath I'm not going to do that, so because it's already been done. But
okay, with that, we'll have to